Hello and welcome back to another devlog on the things I've been working on. With this devlog, I'll be diving into a different side of programming that I'm unfamiliar with and what that can do for my editor tool. And as you can tell by the title of the video, that side of programming is going to be reflection. But what does reflection do and why is it a little weird? Well, it can access code and act on it. Let's imagine that classes are blueprints. When your game is running, it's taking that blueprint and creating an object and interacts through that object. Along with interacting with that newly made object, reflection can also interact with the blueprint itself, and not just with the public exposed parts. Reflection can also get private variables and methods, at least if you have details on what you're actually looking for, since a lot can pop up in your search. Most of the time this is a lot more work than just making a field or a method public, but sometimes it's needed, such as in the case of modding, or just getting access to stuff you were never intended to access to begin with. With the latter, I need that for the notes tool. Turns out changing a game object's icon was once a public feature, but somewhere down the line it got changed into being a private feature, unfortunately. But I can just ignore that now with this function. And since when a game object has an icon, it'll show up in the scene the way I want it to be, just by the change of one of these little buttons from a custom inspector. Adding on to that custom inspector, we can actually remove some of these extra components, or rather just hide them away. Turns out you can have a hide flag on the game object, and then have a separate entirely different flag on a component. Now the UI looks entirely focused on a quick note, and there's no chance an important component gets attached to it. One other thing I want to add before moving on is to add the titles next to the icon. That way I can figure out what they're about at a quick glance without changing selections all the time. And while I'm at it, why not add a quick toggle for when I want to focus on other things, like blocking out a level with very little distractions. Later on, I stumbled across a great time saver, array.sort and iComparer. All iComparer does is compare two elements and decides to move the first element up or down, and then array.sort can handle all the collection transformation efficiently with that iComparer. And with that and a quick button, I've got a good variety of sorting methods, by date, by distance from the camera, by color, and of course, alphabetically from its title. If reflection acts as a code reader, think of attributes as footnotes for the reader to pick up on and act on. Let's take the inspector drawer as an example. The inspector drawer will go through each script on a game object that's selected and draw every public variable. Let's say we mark one float with a range attribute. When the inspector drawer comes across that footnote, it will switch to drawing a slider, and then carry on with its work. And that's how I want the scene toolbar to act. However, I didn't know how reflection worked at the start of the tool, so I'm gonna have to do some restructuring. Right now the tool works from either being hard-coded in from the main toolbar script, or from being added in from a custom inspector. But I would prefer not to write a new script every time I'd like to add something small like just a variable slider, when I could just add in a single word, add to toolbar, as an attribute, so technically it is still one word. Now the toolbar works like this. The default toolbar gets created along with everything that's hard-coded in. The reflection finds every control that extends stbase and has an add st control attribute. First for any controls that are static, and then any controls whose scripts are public and have their game object selected. After copying over the priority value for each control and attribute pair, it checks if the control's headers needs to be made. Before the toolbar gets drawn, any script can add into the mix as well. The other task for the rework was how selection behaved. The original implementation worked by giving a control a selection boolean variable, but it had its issues when controls were nested, or when you're trying to figure out who's the active controller, or if anything is active at all. The new approach works by storing the active control ID as an editor preference. It's much easier to work with now, and hopefully with this method I won't have to think about selections that much in the future. Now that the backend is working in a degree of stability, I can move on to tidying up and fixing small bugs. Right now, all of the storage objects need to be called individually to show and hide them in the inspector, so I made a new class that inherits from motto behavior. hideable model behavior. So now, anything inheriting from this class either now or somewhere down the line in the future is controlled with a single menu item. A few bug fixes here and there and some random tests, and I'm looking forward to exporting this out to the package manager tomorrow because I'm a little tired and I got some day job work to start looking back into. Oh man, it has certainly been a bit because of current events. So lockdown for my state ended, which meant I had to return back to my day job. And turns out balancing Devlog with full-time work is pretty difficult, especially since I was just trained for the position right before I had to leave. And when I did come back, I had to put in a lot of overtime work, which a good and bad thing. In the long run, I have some extra money, which will help me. But I feel like now I've gotten acclimated back to the job and my hours are back down, so I feel like I'll be able to sneak in a devlog from time to time, hopefully. Since each time span for the devlog is going to be shorter and I have less time to work with, I've got some ideas for shorter, small-term projects, which I think will be able to be well-suited. I still would like to finish Plan Game Project, but I think for now I should go for another route, so to speak. I'll probably wind up talking about that more in the next devlog, because this one has gone on quite a while, and I'm already working with 4 or 5 month-old content. I don't really remember. It's either of those, and I'd rather not fall back into that trap again, especially with not having 6 or 7 month-old devlog work. But anyways, it's good to be back again, and I hope you guys take care, and you guys have a good one.